And welcome where I'm going to go over a brief summary of how I set up the Kentucky Model Railway as promised. This is going to be a summary. This is not going to go into great dramatic detail, and I can put in later videos if I see any comments or get any requests on more detail on how I did certain things. But otherwise, we're going to keep this brief as possible and not be lengthy, and just give you a good summary on how I did everything. So with that being said, let's get to it. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the model that I went by. I initially was going to set up this model, but I decided after looking at it, because it was mostly a track layout for just one train, and I have multiple locomotives just like any model railway enthusiast would do, and didn't want to be restricted on my layout to one single locomotive at a time. I wanted to be able to run multiple. So I saw an opportunity with this layout to change it and make it to where I could run multiple. I actually went over several different test runs before I actually decided on my final track layout and how I was going to do it. But starting out, this was the base of what I was working off of for the design. And shortly thereafter, I started laying my track out and came to this design. This was one of my first setups that I'd used. And by the way, this is Woodland Seating's products that I'm using here. And is this going to work? There we go. So in this initial layout, I have the ability to be able to run 2 trains in this one. And let's see, it doesn't give you a preview. You'll get to see a little bit more detail. Yeah, maybe. Oh, of course. Well, initially, that was my first layout attempt, and I wasn't satisfied with it because I wanted the ability to run more trains. So from there, I chose this layout. It took me about 2 or 3 times to get it together and decide that that is the layout that I wanted to use. But you can see that on the upper track, it is separated and I can run a train on it. And then on the inner circle, we also have separation and I can run a separate train on it. And then this large outer loop that comes around, I can run a train. So I can run 3 separate trains consecutively. And then also I have a side track, and off of my siding you can go into the yard, and I can do yard operations exclusive of themselves without interrupting my main lines. And that's what my final goal was to be able to run multiple trains. And when I saw the opportunity to run 3 and then put my sidings in there, and I also have a siding in the middle that I use to store one of my steam trains, and most of the time when I'm running diesel I keep it in there for looks, but then, you know, whenever I'm ready to run some steam, I can pull out whatever steamer that I have there in the center and run it with my other 2 steams at the same time. And down here in the lower right corner, let me move this around so you can see it better. So down here you can see I've got a control panel. This is a control panel for all of my switches. My switches are hooked up on double pole, double throw, and they are momentary switches. So when I flip it one direction, it will activate a switch in one way, and whenever I throw it the other direction, it'll activate the switch in the other way. And basically what I did is I took, it's kind of rudimentary, and I'm actually still using this same box. I haven't switched it over to a nice wooden one yet, but I just took a really nice cardboard box that a different product had come in and painted my track layout on it, and where all of my switches are, I put the toggle switch in, and that's how I know which ones to operate. And another thing that I did, and I'm not exactly sure if I have the ability to show a video right now because it doesn't seem to want to load, but I have LED switches that come off of each one of my switch operations, and when I'm on the main line, the switch LED is not illuminated, but whenever I switch over to the siding or off of the main line, then it will activate the LED to trigger me to know that I have that switch in operation and prevent me from derailing. And even at some points in time, I still do derail. And I'm not sure how much of this video we can play, and I'm not sure how much it will allow you to see, but it kind of gives you a brief idea of how the entire setup looked prior to me getting it completely put together. May have to rely on some still pictures that I have pulled up and ready. So you get the idea though. So that is the bare bones layout, and this was actually a video that I had taken on my final decision that that's the layout that I wanted to use. And from there, I had to decide how I wanted to decorate it, because I knew I wanted to model it after my home state and my home area and typical landscapes of what you see in those areas. And one of the things that I knew that I wanted to do is I knew that I wanted to have a mountain on the layout. And I wasn't able to, the mountain that came with the initial kit, which was the Woodland Scenics kit, I wasn't very satisfied with that, because it was more or less you built it as a permanent structure onto the layout, and you were limited to having blocks and little windows that were the only ways you can access a train if it derailed or if you had an issue when you were running the train and it was inside the mountain, inside the tunnels. And another issue that I had with it is the curves inside of it were way too tight, and some of the trains that I want to run, they don't run that well on extremely tight curves like that. I mean, I do have some tight curves on the layout, but I tried to not put so many tight curves in there, and in a sense, well, okay, I kind of forgot what I was going to say. Yay me on a live stream. So let's just let's just move forward to how I solved the problem. Okay, so the only way that I could see to solve the problem is I needed to design something myself that I knew I could use to be able to fully access the track underneath the mountain, but yet give myself the at least a sense that there was some kind of a mountain there, and keep it based on a similarity of what Kentucky's rolling hills look like. So I decided that I was going to utilize my 3D printer to do so. But in order to do that, even though I tried to find some designs online, I couldn't quite find anything that resembled what I needed. So the best thing that I could do was to go in, and I took from, okay, where's my, there we go. So I took measurements of what it was going to take to cover this area, and made sure that I left plenty of room on the inside for this track and plenty of room to accommodate this track and accommodate this opening for the lower tunnel, and give accommodation for the tunnel for the upper main line. So I utilized the measurements that I took and had to come up with my own 3D design, and that's what this is here. And this is, you're actually looking at the underside of the I guess you would call it the base of the mountain. And this long side here represents, let's see if I can do a, represents what goes on the upper section of the track here. It goes right along the edge. And this long opening here is what accommodates this opening for the bottom section, yet keeps the entire thing enclosed, which is something that I wanted. I wanted a complete enclosure. And this here is what is the opening for the upper main line. And right here. And then here and here, you can see we have both of the upper and lower openings for the two tunnels that I wanted over here on this side. So one of the issues that I ran into in this adventure that I took on to myself was my 3D printer only has a bed that's, I guess that's 12 inches wide, maybe a little bit wider than that. And I was limited to how large I could print. So obviously I can't print that as one large piece. And eventually what I ran into is I had to separate it out, and here are my files, and it ended up being 18 separate pieces that I had to print, and it took the better part of a week and a half of solid printing thankfully with no mistakes. I did have one slight issue, but the piece was very much recoverable, so it didn't really affect it that much. But it took quite some time to get all of these pieces printed, and as each one printed out, I had to label it so that I knew how each piece would fit together to make the finished product, which is this. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So after putting the pieces together, which I used, believe it or not, modeling cement, because it does kind of bond to the, what is it, PLA, I think is the filament. But the modeling cement will kind of bond really well with that. So I used modeling cement and put all of the pieces together. Then once I got them all together and it was bonded, then on the underside, since that would never be seen, I literally took duct tape and duct taped all of the pieces together as an added security to make sure that it's not going to fall apart. And believe you me, it is very, very sturdy. I have had zero issues out of it. But in the end, the finished product that we ended up with, so that I could have a one solid piece mountain that would go over my layout that I could pick up as one unit to access the track underneath. The finished product, which we're not going to see there, and we're not seeing it on that one. I think I had, there we go. Here is the finished 3D printed mountain base. And you can, well, actually you can see one little piece of duct tape there and one little piece of duct tape there. Oh, and you can see my little LEDs there too. Looks like I have a few pieces of track that were activated in that video. I'm sorry that the videos aren't playing. It's probably because my bandwidth is being used to stream live, so my apologies for that. But beside the fact of technical issues, this is the finished 3D printed mountain base. And even though you can see a few little bumps and places where it looks like it's not completely together and held steadfast, believe you me, it is very, very sturdy and there are no problems with it whatsoever. And it did exactly what I wanted it to do. So after getting that done, and this is actually a phase of the project where I started to lay some of the grass down and had already laid down the groundwork. Back here, you can also see that some of the groundwork has been laid, and I hadn't quite decided how I was going to do the lead up to the mountain. And you can also see my styrofoam base that I built as a somewhat guideline to understand how I needed to design the piece for the 3D printer. So that was another thing that I did to make sure that what I was designing was going to fit, and to be able to gauge what I needed to measure and how to get those measurements right. And we'll just get rid of that because it's not even working. So we went from this, and now we've got, so for the groundwork, what I used was Sculptamold, and I mixed it up to where it was somewhat clumpy, but still had sections of it that were a little bit runny. And the reason that I did that is to allow for the ability to make it just kind of naturally texture itself and come out looking like dirt landscape. So after laying that across all of the foam and getting the groundwork laid in, I came across with a mixture of acrylic paint colors and made a dirt wash, so to speak, for the color of the dirt. And then after that point, I was able to go in with the glue for the static grass, and I used Woodland Scenics, the static grass applicator, and I also used the Woodland Scenics glue for the static grass, and watered it down just a little bit so that it would A, set up a little faster, and B, that it would go a little bit further. And I used several different blends of the static grass and just kind of mixed them together to give it a more natural look. And here you can kind of see in the areas like under the bridge and in between tracks where typical lawn maintenance would not occur, that's where I tended to use a little bit more of the, I think it was 7mm grass. And then in the more manicured areas, I tended to use more of a blend of probably 3-to-1 of 2mm and 4mm grass. And I tended to use the more summer blend, because summer has always been my favorite season. So I wanted the trees to be nice and green, and the grass to have that greenish but yet still coming onto the edge of a brownish look, to be more natural for the season as it would look in Kentucky. And for the structures for the barn, I actually did 3D print that one as a whole piece. I had a barn that I was going to build, but I didn't like the way it was turning out, and it was being more of a pain in my neck. So I put that one aside and found a really good model that I was happy with, and 3D printed it, and then painted the piece after it was printed. And I did the same thing with the fence. I actually had some model pieces of fence that were real wood, and I was working with those to start out with, and I didn't really like the way it looked. It looked too much like plasterboard. I don't know. I can't think of what it's called. It's slate board. It's the board that's glued together. I don't know the name of it, but I didn't like the way it looked. So I found a good 3D print model for the fencing that I was able to use to 3D print the fence rows, and I just used straight black filament, and it turned out really, really well, and I really liked the texture, and I really liked the way that it turned out. So I was happy with that. And the tractor, the automobiles, micro machines, they work well for N scale. And the little horses and people, those are from Woodland Scenics as well. I really liked the way they turned out. And some of the trees that you see, I actually did make really good channel that I enjoy looking at and watching to get ideas and, you know, up my skills for making model railroads and just modeling dioramas in general, is Luke Towan's channel. And I thank you, Luke, for putting your videos out there, because I've watched hours and hours and hours of them on end and rewatched them to try to work on my own techniques. So you've been a big help. Thank you, Luke. Shout out. So this tree in particular is a tree that I made based on his wire tree design, and it turned out really, really good, but it just took too damn long. I'm not that fast at it, and I don't spend that much time on the tiny little details sometimes. So, but I did hand make that tree and that tree as well. And this tree here is one that, yet again, I took advantage of my 3D printer and I printed some tree trunks, and I kind of liked the way they looked, so I put foliage on them, and it turned out pretty good. So this was a 3D printed little tree. And the house was a kit that I put together, and I used some airbrushing to weather it, and on some of my other videos in this channel you can get some close-up looks at the house and you can see the texture and the weathering. The airbrushing really made a big difference on weathering the house naturally. And then here, this is a really good picture of the mountain. It's taken, of course, off of the board, and this is probably in about the third phase. I was nearly completely finished with it. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of the underside of it, but you can see I took the Sculpta-Mold here and took advantage of using it to mold my own rolling hill designs and put various textures to it, and then of course covered that with the ground foliage from Woodland Scenics. And of course the back right now, you can see that I still hadn't painted that yet, but it matters not. But this entire unit just picks up, and it's heavy. The Sculpta-Mold and the textures of course made it extremely heavy for what you would think just a hollow piece of plastic would be. And I can pick it up by myself and I can move it. I only do so whenever I have a desperate need, because it's not the most pleasant experience to do so, but it is easily accessible, and I don't have to move anything to do so. Every bit of my track, every bit of my scenery is out of the way, and I just reach, and I typically can get a hand over here on this side and then the hand over here on this side and just lift it straight up off of the board. And then once I've got it lifted up, I can use its weight to get my entire momentum going back with it without falling. And then once I've got it off of the board, I can make a turn and get it to set down. So that's one of my favorite features on this entire railway, is the design that I did on this mountain and the ability that I have to pick it up. And here you can see this is actually the finished board. No, I didn't go in and paint this section of foam. Why? I mean, you can't see it because the mountain, this is the actual place where the mountain goes. And the reason that I painted the ground black is whenever you put the mountain on, it makes everything fit, because anytime that you go into a tunnel situation, the ground is almost decomposed and it's very dark, black, brownish, yucky color. So that's why you see that all of this is black, and over there in the same scenario where the entire mountain meets up with the under tunnel and the upper main line, I also painted all of that black as well. But you can see here the line where the mountain meets up, and then it just matches right up with my landscaping. And the reason I don't have trees here is because whenever the mountain is put back on, in this area here, you can see the textures. I actually have rock molds that I had used and kind of put some cliff edges in these areas. So where it meets up here, that is actual part of your cliff edges that it meets up with, and just kind of lays right on top of that. And of course, one of the other things that I did that I haven't discussed, I did cheat on these trees. These are pre-made woodland scenics trees. My pretty trees here, all of those are the ones that I handmade. But on these guys, yeah, I did. I cheated. I did also make a little waterfall that I put here, and a creek line leading into the horse watering pond. For that, I used clear resin, and I airbrushed the bottom to give a very natural look to the water as it would flow. And for the waterfall, I used some clear silicone and put it on a clear piece of glass that was nice and clean, so that when I peeled it off, that it would actually come out clean and clear. And for that, I was able to do just a little waterfall. It wasn't a huge one, just a little small one. And one of the things that I did run into that I'm not exactly happy with is I was experimenting with a different set of glue for the pasture grass. And for whatever reason, when I tried to get the grass to stick up to it, it didn't do so very well. So looking at it from this angle, you can see a very definite difference in the pastures versus the rest of the grass. And I'm not really excited or happy about that, but considering the way that it's set up, I'm not really sure that I would go in and fix it. I think it's just one of those that, okay, it's a pasture, it's going to be different, so I'm just going to leave it that way, and we're just going to not go through the surmountable effort that I believe it would take to fix it. And another one of the features that I like really good about the layout is, in order to get my trains, my 3 trains running at the same time, and due to the space that I had to be able to do it in, because this is on a ping pong table. So for those that know the size of a ping pong table, that gives you a good idea of the size of the layout. So one of the tricks that I did up here is my outer loop main line. It comes around and it goes through this double crossover. The double crossover allows access to the inner lower loop, and also allows access to the 2 parking sidings that I use over here. And it comes around, which we can't see there, and I'm not sure if I have a photo. I don't, but it comes around the back, and right here I have 2 switches, and I reversed their coupling together so that when the switches are both set to their own respective lines, that it allows this train to continue running on the outer loop without interfering with the train that is running on the inner loop. And whenever I'm ready to park the trains, I will first pull this train and get him backed into his loop and his parked siding, and then the train that I'm running on the upper loop, I will pull him to where he ends at about this point. Then I can activate the 2 switches here and be able to get him backed down and bring him into his siding, because the train that runs on the inner loop comes into the siding and then goes and gets parked into the yard. And that makes for a really nice visual feature. It's showcased in one of my earlier videos that I posted on the channel. I think it's titled Norfolk Southern on the Kentucky Model Railway. It's one of the earliest videos that I posted right after I got this completed. But you can see the action that happens over here, and it's a very nice visual effect that you get in seeing the two trains that makes you think they're about to collide. And at the same time, down here, you also get another nice visual effect. One of the things that I like to do is I like to pull out the train that's running on the outer loop prior to getting the train going that runs on the lower inner loop. And the reason for that is because this outer loop train runs on this double crossover side, and the other one will back in reverse and come in on this side of the double crossover. And it also gives you another nice visual that makes you think in a sense of the trains colliding. And even when this lower train is active on his own main line, when he's coming around this bend and getting ready to go into the lower mountain tunnel, the outer loop train still comes in close enough to give a nice little visual every time whenever they're in sync together to be able to do that. So that's another nice visual effect that I really like. And here, as we were talking about the mountain, you can see here, those are the rock ledges that I was talking about. I put the rock ledge across everything. I was going to put tunnel edging on, but I do notice that a lot of the tunneling in Kentucky, they just tunneled through the ledges a lot of times and didn't necessarily put the brick linings around them, or sometimes they just used regular concrete barriers. And I really liked that look. I saw that look a lot on the old rail service that went across US 68 near Shakertown, and I really liked that look. And actually, I think it was a abandoned tunnel that they may not have even put into service, but I could be wrong on that. At any rate, I really liked that look and the feel that it gave, so I decided to keep it that way, and I just put like a rock cliff edge surfacing on it and just kept that theme all the way around, and I really liked the way that it looked. And you can see how I did the sculpt-a-mold and made the texturing for the rolling hills effect. And after doing all of that, I came across and I finished all the rest of the static grassing and made sure that all of my landscaping was complete and looked as accurate as I could get it for the area that I was working with. And there's another nice view to where you can see a little bit more detail on the whole layout. So that being said, that's exactly what I said I was going to do. I said I was going to give a brief summary of how I put it together from design to finish. And for me, it was a great adventure. I highly recommend anyone that wants to get into a project that likes to do things and build things and create things and tinker, like myself. Most people are quite surprised that I am the tinkerer that I am. I have a lot of projects and a lot of things that I get myself into. it keeps me on my toes all the time and keeps my brain sharp, diddling with the continuous challenges that I put myself up to. But it usually does surprise people when they find out that that's the kind of person that I am. I do love to do these kind of things. So if any of you have any ideas you want to throw at me to maybe improve, or if you've got any questions or any topics about, projects or, model railroading that you want to learn more about or understand how I did various things on the layout, please feel free to drop a line in the comments and I will get to them as soon as I can. So thank you all so much for joining in to the chat, and I appreciate any feedback that you want to give. Thank you. Have a great night, and we'll see you next time.